Good. Okay. So for those of you that can't come, we got the video. The test tomorrow is 100 questions like all the unit tests are. The first 60 questions this time are matching in groups of 10. And those are all either terms, theories, or concepts. So not all of them, but most of them would be like bold or highlighted concepts in the chapter. So since there's 6 chapters this time, that's why we have 60. There's 10 from each chapter. Some of them are terms that might have been used in previous chapters, but they are terms that are in those chapters. So I think they're pretty straightforward. It's just kind of you know it or you don't. Then, like always, the last 40 questions are matching multiple choice in a group of 5. So you'll get the question, there'll be 5 potential answers. The test is all Scantron again. The essays are due tomorrow, and what else? The journals, if you didn't finish those, are due tomorrow. And then the video analysis is due tomorrow. So quite a bit of stuff, but it should all help you to prepare for the test. So I'm just going to start with the concept section, the application section, and then we'll go back to the other one. Is that okay? Everybody? Okay. So, chapter 11 was on race and ethnicity, minority statuses, stuff like that. So, one of the questions, or one of the concepts we talked about is what is a minority? So, in order to answer a number of these questions, you'd have to be able to identify that accurately. So, what's a minority? What's the book definition for a minority?
Category of people distinguished by physical or cultural difference that sets apart in school.
Okay, so a group of people categorized by some differences that society sets apart. So one of the points that I tried to make was that from the concept of social stratification and minority status, you don't have to be in the mathematical minority to be a minority. So for example, in certain areas in the South, in the 1850s, pre-Civil War era, there were more African Americans in terms of numbers than there were Caucasian people. But who had the power in the situation? The Caucasian people. Same thing, the other example you'll see in the text is in India, when the British Empire controlled India, there was one British person for every 1,000 Indians. So the Indian people in that setting would be considered a minority. So again, the 3 parts of the definition are, it's a category of people with some distinguishing characteristics that society sets apart as different. When we look at college students and trends and beliefs about racial and ethnic backgrounds, different minority groups, how are they different than older people?
They're more accepting, right?
Okay, yeah, college students tend to be more accepting. Good.
What was that?
College students tend to be more accepting. We also talked about different theories of prejudice and different theories of discrimination. First of all, what's the key difference between prejudice and discrimination?
Prejudice is like a judgment kind of, and then discrimination is like how you're treated.
Yeah, in short, prejudice is thought, attitude, whereas discrimination is behavior. So that's the simple definition. Yep. So now remember we talked about different theories of prejudice. There's 4 that the text identifies. Remember I had you guys vote on which one you think best explains prejudice in most instances. And most of the people in the class voted for culture theory, if you remember that. There's another theory that's called scapegoat theory. Scapegoat theory. According to scapegoat theory, what causes prejudice and discrimination?
Someone that has less power is who you blame it on, right?
Blame what on?
Your problems on them?
Yeah. So if you have some problems, society's not going well, whatever, and you see somebody that has less power than you can blame them. So like when the school's messy at lunch, it's it wouldn't be freshmen anymore, it's the sophomores now, right? They have less power than you. Stupid sophomores, they're making such a mess. Okay. Another chapter that we talked about, chapter 12, was on economics and politics. Economics and politics. In the economy, there's a variety of different parts to it, a variety of different sectors to the economy. What's the sector called where it's like you're actually farming or actually mining oil or iron or gold? What sector of the economy is that?
Primary.
Primary? Good. So then what's the next sector of the economy called?
Secondary.
So how's the secondary different from the primary sector?
Where you're making those like resources into something.
Okay, you're converting them into something that's usable. Good. And then what's the third type called? Tertiary. And then okay, so that's services. So that's you're selling the stuff, or you're servicing the stuff, or you're working in a restaurant serving people food. So for the restaurant analogy, the people that are actually like raising the cattle or raising the wheat, whatever, for the pizza we're gonna have in a second, they'd be primary. Secondary would be people in a factory that's like packaging the dough to get shipped out here, and then the people working here would be the tertiary sector. So if you can apply that, that'll get you a couple questions. Okay. We also talked about two different basic forms of economies, and there's subtle differences and more specific examples, but what were the two types of economies we talked about?
So like socialism and capitalism.
Socialism and capitalism. So what's the key defining feature between the two?
Socialism is like everything equal, and capitalism is kind of free market, right?
That's true, but it's not the key defining feature. What's the key?
I don't know, you might have just said this, but government, like one's run by government, one's run by people.
Yeah, the level of government control. So which one is controlled more by the government?
Socialism?
Socialist systems, and capitalists are less. Have we ever had a completely capitalist or completely socialist economy? No, because there's always governments that are involved in something. Even if it's just like a little council meeting, they decide to do something, that's still some government involvement. So back in the day when they had tribes that migrated around places, there wasn't a formal structure like Washington, D.C., but there were still elders that met together to make decisions. So that still guided some of the expansion. Okay, now there's some subtle differences to these as well. What's it called if you have a primarily free market system in which the government has a lot of social programs to help individuals? More specific. That's part of it. It's two words. Say what you said.
Welfare.
Say what you said. Welfare capitalism. Good. What's it called if you have a free market system primarily, but the government's still involved in a lot of key industries? State capitalism. Good. Another concept we talked about in the chapter was different types of authority. That's a Max Weber concept. You've got a type of authority that's based on formally enacted laws or some type of agreement among people. What's that called? No, types of authority, not types of government. It's different. Types of authority. We've got enacted laws. It's based on some logic. That's called, you got your notes? That's called rational legal authority. Rational legal authority. Then There's another type of authority that's based on cultural precedent. Cultural precedent, just commonly held beliefs that weren't necessarily voted on or agreed upon. That's called traditional authority. And then if you have authority that comes from like the unique skills or the force of somebody's personality, that's called charismatic authority. Now, while most leaders have a little bit of all of this, certain leaders err on one side or err on the other. So for example, if you look at presidents of the United States, they have elements of all of that. They had to have a certain level of charismaticness for them to get elected. People had to like them. Then once they got elected, then that went into the rational legal authority. And then there's been precedent for countries to have one leader for a while, to have some type of executive that would fit in the traditional model. So let me give you some examples of people, and I want you to tell me which type they fit under mostly, okay? If you have, I should give you, let's say Hitler, for example. What's Hitler?
Was he charismatic?
Charismatic, yep. Gotta open up the right version of the test. Hold on. I'm scrolling down and I'm like, I have this thing done. What's going on? I opened the one on the hard drive, not the one on the flash drive. Okay, how about Confucius? We only got 3 options, right? Traditional, rational, legal, or charismatic? No. Confucius would be largely charismatic again. What about like a real popular like football coach? Where do they mostly get their authority from?
Like tradition.
That's charismatic again. Make sense?
Couldn't it be tradition too? Because they're like winning a lot of championships.
Yeah, in that sense though, tradition isn't what it means. Does that make sense? Like
Give
that,
an example of tradition.
well, okay, so if you, well, like a prince or something would be more based on tradition. Or if there is a, you know how they have the line of succession in monarchies? So if like you two have a kid, both you die, your kid's the next person in line unless something has been changed, okay? That'd be more like tradition.
Okay.
Charismatic is like the person that has done a lot of stuff. So you're talking about tradition in the sense of like winning a lot of games and you have tradition. That's a different context than this
What
one.
about rational legal authority? What would be an example of that?
Well, the President of the United States. Yeah. President of the United States, Prime Minister, anybody that comes to power through some formal legal process, school board president, student council president, stuff like that. And again, all people really have, well, a lot of people have elements of all of these. I'm just talking, where do they derive most of their power from? Okay. Let's see. Scroll back here a little bit. There we go. Okay. If you're in a marriage that has many women, what's that called? Many women. Thanks, man.
Yep. Incoming plates.
I don't know. Is everybody gonna have some, or
I'm not.
just like 5 or 6? Yeah. Thanks, man. Many women. So many is poly, right? If there's one, it's mono.
So polygamy.
That's in general for many spouses. Polygyny is like many women. Yeah. Think of the root words here. Yeah, poly is many, and then like the root GYN is like womb. So like most commonly used version of that word that people have heard of is like a gynecologist, right? So they're a doctor that deals with women. For and, thanks man. The way I remember this for polyandry is there was a supplement that it's now banned, but like Mark McGuire and Sammy Sosa were taking it. It's called androstenedione. It's a like precursor to testosterone. So that andro or andry has something to do with males in it. I don't remember exactly what it means. But if you can remember like the root words and what they mean, that kind of helps you, right? So mono means one. You guys are aware of that, correct?
Yeah.
So monotheism, monogamy. Poly means many. Polygamy is the general term for many, being married to many people. Polyandry is like one wife with many husbands. Polygyny is one husband with many women. Okay, if you were to take the key theories we talked about in sociology and apply them to an analysis of the family, functionalists are going to look at how a family functions in society. So if you look at the definition of family to functionalists, it's social institution which exists to regulate sexual activity, provide a means for inheritance, and also to regulate the bearing and raising of children. Conflict theorists are going to look at how families help social class systems, inequality keep operating. SI theorists are going to look at how families define their roles and perceive what they should do. And then exchange theorists, social exchange theory, again, we talked about before, kind of relates to, like The Sims is usually the example I give for that. So if you've played The Sims before, when you're interacting with people, it's like a +2 if you hang out with somebody. Has anybody played The Sims before? Yeah. So over time, if you do that, there's like a lot of positive points. Your relationships continue in the video game. If you do stupid stuff, it's negative points and then they end. So exchange theorists kind of operate on that. So exchange theorists assume that families get together in part based on what people can offer each other. So it's not necessarily like greedy per se. They come together for mutual self-interest. It's kind of like the I scratch your back, I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine saying. That's an exchange analysis of family. Okay, when we talked about population growth rates throughout the world, what societies have the fastest growing populations?
Low income.
Yeah, low-income societies. We also talked about something called the demographic transition theory that has 4 different stages to it. In the first stage, you have high mortality or low mortality. High mortality in the first stage, and then how about fertility? Fertility would be birth rates. High as well. Good. Okay. As you progress into the second and third stages, what happens to mortality rates?
They would go down.
They go down. Mortality rates is how many people are dying. Good. But right away in the second stage, fertility rates stay really high. That's where you get that big population growth spurt. Now, it continues that way until the end of the second stage, and then at the end of the second stage, you've got high fertility rates, low mortality rates. Then during the third stage, you start to see a falling off of fertility rates until they enter the fourth stage. In the fourth stage, you have both. Low mortality rates, low fertility rates. So, like Canada, what stage would they be in?
Fourth.
The fourth stage, correct. You guys gotta grab that while it's still warm, it's pretty good.
Okay, you talk me into
Okay,
it.
go ahead, Jamie. Take one.
Do you guys want?
I'll have to hold this up for the video. Dessert pizza for the people that came for free.
Hopefully you guys get it.
Do you want a scoop me one?
I don't care if you touch it. Do you want this
You want
one?
a new one?
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
The other thing we talked about in population growth rates was what's called an age-sex pyramid. So that divided in the middle, you have on each side the different genders, correct? And as you progress up the pyramid, does it get younger or older? It gets older. So in societies that are like low income right now, what do their age-sex pyramids look like?
They're wide at the bottom.
It's like a triangle.
Almost like a triangle, yep. So you see like this. So exponential growth through the bottom, not that many older people. Countries like the United States, what do they tend to look like?
More equal.
Yeah, kind of like this. Obviously, as they get to the top, it's gonna end, so it'll get smaller, but coming through they're more equal. So let's say you're looking at one of those, and you see that a society has way more younger males than females. Way more younger males, or way more younger females than males. What does that tell you? What can that give you a clue to?
That's kind of like China, maybe.
Okay, so what does that cue you into though?
They have a preference to like carry on the name or.
Yeah, they value one gender more than the other. Yep, good. Another thing we talked about in class was different types of social movement, looking for change. The two key variables there, remember I drew the box on the board? The two key variables are the amount of change you're seeking, as well as the amount of people you're seeking to change. So if you have a social movement that's seeking to change a small group of people, a very specific group of people, and just change them a little bit, what type is that?
Small amount of people, you said?
Small amount of people, just change them a little bit. What type is that? Alternative. If you have a type of movement that you're trying to change a lot for everybody, what's that called?
Radical.
Nope.
Revolutionary.
Revolutionary. Yep. So think like a revolution. You have a revolution in a country, it changes everything for everybody. So be able to identify those and apply those. There's a few examples of that. Okay. Like always, there'll be some questions about manifest and latent functions. So make sure you understand what a manifest function is. That's the intended stated consequence of something, whereas a latent function is the unintended consequence. Latent functions are not necessarily bad. They're just not the intended purpose of a thing.
Give another example of reformative.
Which type?
Reformative.
Okay, so what are the examples that I gave in class? Do you remember? For alternative, we had what?
Gay rights.
Okay, well, let's start from the beginning. I'll go through all of them. For alternative, we had what?
NHS.
Okay,
Someone wrote that.
okay.
I should.
The one that was in the notes was Promise Keepers, which is a group that seeks to reform men that are already Christians to make them like better husbands, whatever. So see how that's a small group, and they're trying to change them just a little bit.
Could be like a church group
So,
or something.
well, yeah, but it doesn't matter what group it is. All that matters is how many people you're changing. So that's the first thing. You're changing not that many people, and then you're changing them just a little bit. It's alternative. Okay. Now let's go to the right. What's the next one?
So
So
would
you-
a sports team be like
No. What are the two variables? We've got not that much change, but applied to everyone. Actually, I gotta think what the drawing looks like. I don't have it in front of me. Okay, so top left would be alternative.
Yeah.
And then if you're going to change a small group of people but change quite a bit of them, that's to the right. What's that called?
redemptive.
So you want a lot of change for a small group of people. So examples for that would be like well, again, it doesn't really fit the. Well, yeah, it does. Rehab would be an example of that. So you're taking somebody that's just really, really messed up, trying to change it. Okay, now go to the bottom left. You've got small change. You're trying to change everybody. What's that called? Jamie? Reformative. Good. An example of that would be just kind of the basic recycling movement. They're seeking they want everybody in the community to do it, but really to get everybody to recycle their cans isn't really that much work. Okay, revolutionary would be like PETA or some organizations that actually call for returning to like not using electricity at all, just living in the wilderness. That's pretty revolutionary change. Okay, so the variables are what matter more so than like what like type of group it is. So if it's environmental, PETA, the example I gave in class when I was in DC, where they were like laying in an area this big in a pile of bodies, like with fake blood smeared on themselves, naked, getting pulled into the cop cars, taken off to jail, with signs that said, "You wouldn't do this to animals, why did you do this to people?" They want drastic change for everybody. But there's also people that are in the environmental movement that care about animals, that seek to just change it a little bit. So like Bob Barker used to host the Price is Right before Drew Carey, and he'd end every time, and I think Drew Carey still says this too.
Spayed or neutered.
Yeah, remember, have your pet spayed or neutered. Good night or goodbye, everybody. Right? That's not that big of a change. What type would that be then? Wants everybody with pets to do something. Formative. Okay, so you guys understand those? Good?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, some other concepts we talked about were affirmative action and racial profiling. What's the difference between those two things?
Well, affirmative action is like accepting them actually, and racial profiling is just you them.
Would affirmative action be like providing opportunity for them, and racial profiling is like excluding them from the opportunity because of it?
Sort of. Both of them involve treating minorities differently, correct? Affirmative action and racial profiling both involve treating minorities differently. In essence, affirmative action is done for the benefit of minorities, whereas racial profiling would be done for their detriment. So affirmative action most commonly takes place in two things, in education and in the workforce. Racial profiling most commonly takes place where? Okay, airports, or more general, like law enforcement situations. So are instances of affirmative action, or let me start in general. Is it okay to treat, legally, is it okay to treat minorities differently in some circumstances? Yes or no?
Yeah, because affirmative action.
Because affirmative action is legal. Okay, so legally, yes it is. Have all affirmative action practices been upheld by the court system? Every affirmative action case ever, has it always been upheld by the courts in the U.S.? No. But have some affirmative action court cases been upheld by the court? Yes.
What was the outcome of that one case that we were talking about, the girl who applied to law school?
Gratz Bollinger
Yeah.
in Michigan.
Did they rule in favor of her?
They ruled in favor of the school, but they said that they had to change how they applied their number system somehow. So they did rule in favor of the school, though. So basically they said you can consider race, but it can't be the only factor. I don't know. A lot of those decisions get really wordy and it's kind of hard to follow. But I think that that was in the court when that case probably came out in 2002. Because I remember we were debating in a class I took in college. I remember that they ruled in favor of the school, but basically said you got to change the way you're applying the number system. You remember that's the case where you had to get points to get into the law school, and if you had a straight A average, it was worth like 60 points. Straight B average was worth 40. If you were a minority, that was worth 20 points as well. So in effect, if you were a minority that was underrepresented minority, so Asians were already represented, they didn't get any bonuses or whatever. And so if you're an underrepresented minority, you got the same treatment in essence as somebody that was a straight B student. Somebody that was a straight A student if you were a straight B student. So they basically said you gotta redo the point system, but you can still consider race as a factor. Okay, we talked about the two basic systems in the text. Okay, what type of economy does the U.S. have mostly? Remember how we talked about socialism, capitalism, market communism, state capitalism, welfare state. Which one of those terms best identifies the United States right now? Do we have social programs designed to help the people?
Yeah.
Okay, like what? Give me some examples.
Medicare.
Medicaid, Social Security, welfare, etc. So what would best describe our country?
Welfare capitalism.
Yeah, we'd be a welfare state. Yep.
Or welfare.
One of the trends that we saw from the 1940s to the present time, what has happened to the family in terms of people working? What changes have happened to the family in terms of people working? Okay, both spouses are working now. Good. That's the trend. Now, in heterosexual couples where both spouses work, who does the majority of the housework? Or is it equal? The women do the majority of the housework, yes. Even in households where both people work. Another concept we talked about was single parenthood, like the instances of children being born to single mothers. What are two of the racial and ethnic groups in the United States that have that happen the most often?
African Americans.
African Americans and
Hispanics.
not Hispanics. They're higher than most Caucasians and Asians, but there's another group that's higher than that. Yeah, Native Americans is the other group. What are some of the functions of religion that we talked about in our class? What does it do in society? There's three major functions of religion that we talked about. One was helping to unite people together. They call that social cohesion. Another function, if you look at it like religion, all the religions have some standard of behavior. Like do this, don't do this. Do this, don't do this. What's that? Yeah, so like social morality or social control. And then the last one we talked about was providing meaning and purpose for individuals when stuff doesn't make sense. Remember, Durkheim talked about a lot of the key terms with religion. He talked about the profane and the sacred. You remember those terms? So which one of those two terms applies to everyday life?
Profane.
Profane. Whereas sacred is something that inspires like awe, reverence, or is unexplainable. Good. So another concept we talked about related to religion was churches, sects, and cults. Which one of those is the most integrated in society?
Churches.
Churches. Which one's the least?
Cult.
Cult.
And sex is like in between, or what was sex?
Sect would be like a subdivision of a religious organization. What's the most commonly reported religious affiliation in the United States?
Christianity.
More specific.
Protestant.
Yeah, Protestants, correct. In North Dakota, what's the most common? North Dakota, what's the most common? Yeah, Protestant, Lutheran specifically. In the southeast United States, what's the most common?
Baptist.
Baptist, good. Utah, Mormon, Middle East. What's the most common in the Middle East? No.
Like Middle Eastern.
No, Middle East in the world as a whole. Sorry.
Oh.
The Middle East. Islamic. Yeah, good.
Yeah, that sounds like
That's what I was thinking too.
You said Catholic, I'm like, oh man. I was thinking, oh man. Okay, what's the leading cause of death in the United States in 1900?
it's like disease and
What type of disease? Influenza. Good.
And that was the 1900s.
In 1900. What is it today? Heart disease. So in general, the trend that you saw in the 1900s, it was like illnesses, viral infections, bacterial infections. Now it'd be more of diseases that people get towards the end of their life. Okay. Another thing we talked about in the economy, as well as one of the chapters, chapter 24, was costs of different sectors of the economy. Remember I had a graph that showed how much healthcare costs have been going up, and how as a percentage of GDP, it's about 20% of all the money we spend in this whole country, out of all the money we make is spent on healthcare. What other thing has risen drastically? Has housing risen in price drastically over the last 5 years? Nationwide, has housing risen in price? No. Now, what happened recently? There's a big housing bubble that burst, right? So that when all the investments went to garbage, most of the investments are in housing. So housing costs nationwide have dropped quite a bit. In North Dakota, they've risen because there's more demand for housing, especially in the western part of the state. But nationwide, housing has gone down quite a bit. What about like consumer goods like TVs or PlayStations or DVDs, cell phones, stuff like that? What have they done in price?
Down in price.
They've gone up? Like,
they kind of make
well, like, okay, look at that TV above the Coke sign. If we went to buy that exact same TV 4 years ago, how much would it cost? A lot more or a lot less?
Probably more actually.
Like 4 years ago, it'd be more.
Yeah.
Yep. So the trend, like for consumer goods, is they've stayed the same or gone down. So what else has risen in cost a lot? Any of you have? Yeah, well, gas has. That's true. But do any of you have older brothers or sisters? Or like Ryan? What's he doing now?
College.
The college costs gone up a little bit?
Yeah.
Yeah, college costs have gone up a lot. Yep. There was a while there where actually, as a percentage, college costs rose more than healthcare costs did. It was like 2006 to 2008. So, and everybody talks about how bad healthcare costs are. College costs are going up quite a bit. Okay, in countries where you have a healthcare system that's paid for by taxes and run by the government, that's called a nationalized healthcare system. The benefit to having a nationalized health care system for a country is what?
Everyone gets it.
Okay, everyone gets it. What's a detriment to that system?
Like waiting time.
Waiting time is pretty bad. What else?
You don't necessarily get to choose your doctor, right?
Right, you don't necessarily. You have less choice. Yeah. Because now, like, if you really want to, you could switch jobs or change health insurance companies, whatever. The government runs everything. You're stuck with the government. A couple other concepts we talked about were Gemeinschaft and Gesellschaft. Ferdinand Tönnies was the theorist that came up with those, whereas Durkheim had the mechanical and organic solidarity. So mechanical solidarity is most closely related to, is it Gemeinschaft or Gesellschaft? Gemein. Yeah, so mine and mechanical. So which one, between Gemein and Gesellschaft, which one is most common in small towns? Gemeinschaft. So Gesellschaft is more focused on mutual self-interest, like you get together to play a game or learn something, but not just to be together necessarily.
What were the two ones for Durkheim?
Mechanical and organic solidarity. If you believe that one racial category is innately superior or inferior to another, what's that called? Racism. If you have a rigid generalization about an entire category of people, stereotype. Well, no, excuse me. That would be prejudice. Simplified description applied to every person in some category is a stereotype. Let's see. If there's some of these are hard to. I'm trying to figure out how to ask these without just giving you the answers, because that's not cool. I know you wouldn't care, but because I'm going back to the term section now. But what's like a thing that exists in society to perform a certain function? It involves a group of people. It exists in society to perform a certain function.
It's not social institution.
It is a social institution. Good. What is the term for power that people perceive as legitimate rather than coercive? Okay, so what were the three types of authority that we talked about again? Rational, legal, charismatic, and traditional. If you have a market that's controlled by one producer, what's that called? Monopoly. Good. What's marriage between, like, let's say, well, let me give you an example. Let's say that I have a friend, well, here's an example. If I tell you a story about my friend John that I wrestled with in college, that the guy that walked around, Ma, didn't know I could take you, from Kenya. Did I tell you guys that story?
Oh, I think so.
So, okay. So John moved here from Kenya to the United States. He's never seen snow before and never been out of Kenya. So he fits the description of like a Kenyan marathon runner. He looks like somebody from Kenya. And he married a Caucasian girl from Minnesota, I think. Okay? So I see him at the grocery store with his family. When you have marriage, like the marriage between him and his wife, because they come from different backgrounds, what's that called? You marry people from different social classes. Exogamy. So remember we had monogamy, being married to one partner. So when you see that ending, that's something to do with marriage. So I married my wife. I'm like a quarter Norwegian, a quarter Swedish, and then part Russian, German. Like the other side of the family is a bunch of different European mixes. My wife is almost entirely Norwegian. So what would that be called?
Endogamy.
Homogamy. Marrying somebody with the same social characteristics.
What's endogamy?
Endogamy. You stumped me. I don't know. What is that?
I thought it was like come from the same like background.
It says marriage people between the same social category.
Okay. So endogamy, what's homogamy then? Do I have this wrong?
You would think homogamy is the same too, though.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah. Homogamy, it means the same thing. I know it means the same thing. That's not in the notes. Homogamy is not in the notes.
Well, 'cause I don't remember.
Is it in the
being
book?
on the bottom.
Do you have your book here? So then I pulled it like right out of the book. So marriage would be chapter 13. Yeah, right here. Marriage between people with the same social characteristics. So endogamy is marriage between people of the same social category. So it's kind of the same thing.
Characteristic being that you're Norwegian. Category being like the same. Well,
Yeah, but it's pretty much the same thing though. Listen to the definition again. Marriage between people of the same social characteristics. Marriage between people of the same social category. What defines your social category? The social characteristics that you have.
right.
So, like, I think it's kind of the same definition. I'll reword it in the test here to make sure that it matches directly though. Does that make sense? But, so both of them won't be in there. You know what I'm saying? You won't see homogamy and endogamy.
But could they essentially be used interchangeably or not really?
I think so. I could be wrong, but I think so. Because one of them's same social characteristics, one is the same social category. I guess it depends on how specific you want to be. If you take the literal definition of the word social characteristics, then you'd want to marry somebody that's, if you're 25% Norwegian, it'd be 25%. If it says category, then maybe that would be somebody that's like Caucasian. It's more general, I guess. I don't know. I'm not going to split hairs over those definitions. But, okay. In the education chapter, we talked about a variety of different things. What's it called if somebody doesn't pass classes but you still move them on anyways?
You don't pass, but what?
If somebody doesn't pass classes, that you still move them on anyways. So like this happens mostly in elementary and middle school. So you're a 6th grader. Who in here knows somebody that was like a 7th grader, let's say, and they failed everything, but they still moved on to 8th grade? Can you think of somebody like that? Don't name that person, but can you think of somebody like that? And then when they were 8th graders, they failed everything, they still moved on to 9th grade. What's that concept called? That's called social promotion. That's keeping a group of students together based on their age or their social group. Now what's it called if you separate students into different groups? So like AP, US history, regular US history, developmental US history. What's that called? That's called tracking. What's the study of populations called? Demography or demographics. Good. What's the difference between mortality and fertility?
Mortality is incidence of death. Fertility is the
Yep. Good. What's the trend been in worldwide, also in the United States, in terms of migration? Like within a country, what do people do? They move from what type of areas to what type of areas?
Small to big.
Okay, so what are the other terms for that though? She's right, small to big, but use the geography terms.
Rural to urban.
Yeah, moving from rural to urban areas. So what's that process called? That's the general term for it, but for
Urbanization.
Urbanization, yeah. The other things we talked about, lastly, for social change involved modernism and postmodernism. And just social change in general and different causes of social change. What's the key difference between postmodernism and modernism?
Modernized already. Modernized.
Well, yeah, that's true. But postmoderns are critical of modernism, number one.